we're going to get started. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on the Stop Leaving Money on the Table webinar. My name is Matt Schumann with ManufacturingPower, and I'll be guiding us through today's discussion as we look at how manufacturers can find savings opportunities while coping with supply chain disruptions due to coronavirus and other ways to overcome MRO and industrial supply challenges. Before we get started, this webinar is sponsored by ManufacturingPower. Please enjoy a brief video explaining what we do, and then we're ready to jump right into today's topic.
Purchasing and finance are happy because a few months ago, they joined the Work Center by ManufacturingPower. Now, when they need to buy their MRO or industrial supply, purchasing pro can see what their peers paid for those exact same items. Combine that information with their historical pricing, and you have some serious negotiation and buying power. With the Work Center, purchasing and finance have a single source of data to manage their business smarter, more efficiently, and make the best strategic cost-saving decisions possible. When it's time to buy or choose distributor partners, their team automatically gets the information they need across all types of products and categories, thanks to the Work Center by ManufacturingPower. This really comes in handy when purchasing is building large RFQs, negotiating with distributors, or forecasting for next year. As time passes, your needs and people may change. Not to worry. The Work Center will keep on showing the data that counts. ManufacturingPower members are constantly adding new pricing and items which update the database automatically in real time. And since the Work Center provides a single source of truth from quote to purchase, you'll continuously find savings where you never thought possible. Who doesn't like savings? Visit ManufacturingPower.com to unlock the power of group data, find recurring cost savings, and maximize every dollar you spend.
Okay, let's dive in. Here's an outline of what we're going to discuss this morning and what we hope you'll take away. First, we'll loosely define MRO, commonly referred to as maintenance, repair, and operations, also adding industrial supplies. Second, we'll discuss supply chain disruptions and common challenges that manufacturing procurement teams deal with around MRO and industrial supply spend. Third, we'll discuss solutions that will dramatically increase your team efficiencies and cost savings opportunities around your MRO and industrial supply spend categories. And finally, at the end of the webinar, we're going to give you each a template with proven techniques that you can print out and fill in the blanks with your team and use for your own use. First, let me introduce our guests. This morning, we have Peggy Soden. Peggy is our expert in purchasing. She brings more than 20 years of experience in indirect sourcing, inventory management, and business operations. She has worked for both large corporations and small companies, utilizing her strengths in RFP creation and management, relationship building, change management, and personnel training. Peggy is currently the president of ISM Twin Cities and the global indirect category manager for Stratasys, a local leading American manufacturer and 3D printer and 3D production system for office-based rapid prototyping and direct digital manufacturing solutions. Welcome, Peggy.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Next, we have Mike Franz. Mike is ManufacturingPower's founder and CEO. Mike has spent his entire career building expertise in manufacturing, business development, and operational success. Mike's most recent industry experience comes from his time spent while working for Kimberly-Clark, an American multinational corporation that produces mostly paper-based consumer products. Mike has nearly 20 years of experience working with industrial distribution, materials management, and as a tier 1 supplier. With this experience, Mike created a new-to-market manufacturing industry-specific market solution and founded ManufacturingPower in 2017 with the goal to bring price transparency and cost savings to the often overlooked categories of MRO and industrial supplies. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks, Matt. Great to be here.
And myself, again, my name is Matt Schumann, and I'm currently heading up marketing and sales efforts for ManufacturingPower, guiding our product roadmap and reporting back voice of customer. I have spent my entire professional career holding roles in sales, business development, marketing, and operational excellence. I'm humbled to say I have had many wonderful experiences in industry, driving significant revenue growth eliminating waste and inefficiencies, and building lasting client relationships locally, nationally, and globally. Prior to joining ManufacturingPower, I worked for Siemens, a German multinational conglomerate company headquartered in Munich and the largest industrial manufacturing company in Europe with branch offices all over the world. So I believe in this fourth industrial revolution, companies big and small must be able to quickly adapt to the rapid pace of change and innovation in order to not only stay ahead of their competition, but to survive. What I feel most compelled by what ManufacturingPower is doing and bringing to the industrial manufacturing community is market price transparency, which otherwise has not and really does not exist today. The absence of market pricing transparency makes it more challenging for manufacturers to predict and control supply costs. This greatly affects small to mid-sized manufacturers' bottom line and cost of goods sold. Just a few marginal percentage points can mean the difference in staying in business or unfortunately going out of business. Mike, I know you're extremely passionate about this topic, and Peggy, you are too. You live and breathe it every day. Let's get started. So Peggy, everyone loves a good acronym, right? MRO. MRO is an acronym which stands for Maintenance, Repair, and Operations. It seems to me that most companies have their own version of what that means internally from a purchasing, accounting, and operational standpoint. Can you tell us how you define that category and how do industrial supplies fit into that definition as well?
Matt, you're correct. Every company has their own way of defining it. Nuts, bolts, screws, those kind of things that go into a machine, that's pretty obvious and runs across the board that is MRO. But it also can include things like motors, PPE, or industrial supplies, depending on what the company feels is in their MRO category.
Mike, you have 20 years worth of experience selling these products. How do you define it? And why should manufacturing companies even care about these items?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I've broadly defined these items as anything that supports your shop, from the front of the house to the back. Anything really from tooling to toilet paper.
Yeah.
So why are these items important? Studies show that while the actual cost of MRO purchases may be around 15% or so of the cost of goods sold, the number of transactions can be 60% or more of the total requisitions. This means that an inordinate amount of administrative time is spent on purchasing and managing these items. You know, based on my experience, this is compounded by a few common situations, including a wide variety of buying personnel in different roles with different responsibilities, multi-locational MRO purchasing with the autonomy to make purchasing decisions that create inconsistencies, a real lack of reliable data from spend analysis and supplier benchmarking, and some pretty ineffective purchasing systems, which are typically very heavily reliant on spreadsheet data, which are really prone to errors as well. And clearly, these situations are not the most effective way to operate a shop. And even though the value of MRO purchases may be a fraction of direct materials procurement, there are still significant operational, purchasing efficiencies, and cost savings that can be found with bottom line impact, Matt.
Wow, well, that seems like an overlooked category, Mike. Is there a specific example you can share?
Yeah, you know, really the biggest cost savings opportunity that we're seeing right now are around tooling, fasteners, safety or PPE products. These are only a few product categories, but they're very common industry-wide.
Okay, well, that's a good segue into the next topic. Many of those products are sourced in low-cost countries. Peggy, I think we're all concerned about the impact that coronavirus will have on the global supply chain. What are a few of your biggest concerns?
I think one of the biggest concerns most people have if they're buying from places out of China is the supply impact. You know, China went from their Chinese year shutdown right into the coronavirus. So in some of these cases, the factories that are producing these are barely getting up and running right now. I talked to somebody last week who does a lot of business in China, and they said that of the few suppliers that are still running, that are starting to run, they're at 15% capacity.
Wow. Wow. You know, just to add to that, Matt, I would echo what Peggy said. And just to add a little bit based on my experience during other epidemics, working with distribution during my time with Kimberly-Clark, some of the biggest challenges were around respirator and dust mask supply specifically. Global outbreaks put a real strain on distributor supply, and as an end user, If you have reliable and trustworthy data to help forecast actual needs in these unique situations, you're way ahead of the game. Providing this data to your supply chain only increases your value as a partner as well.
Yeah, thanks, Mike and Peggy. That sure makes sense to me. It seems like some good preemptive measures in order to be most prepared for these types of situations. Now, I'd like to ask about more maybe everyday challenges you've experienced around these categories. Peggy, if we could start with you. Based on your experience, can you tell us a few of the most aggravating challenges as someone leading cost reduction, inventory management, or other projects dealing with these categories?
Well, in purchasing, one of our bigger challenges is data. So what do you have for data? Where does it come from? How accurate is it? You can spend a lot of time before even thinking about going into an RFP or a negotiation, just cleansing your data, as well as figuring out what MRO is in your company. You know, in my past, we were going into an MRO RFP. We pulled the data and found that everything from PPE to true, what we would have called MRO, into industrial supplies were categorized and sometimes not categorized as MRO, depending on which location we pulled the data from.
Sure.
Yeah, and you know, Matt, just to add to that, from the supply side, supplier performance, building trust with distribution and benchmarking are pretty critical and crucial to a company's success as well. And this category is difficult because outside information can be tough to gather and analyze. Most comparative analysis is done with the historical data, and that's it. In my experience, it's also difficult to see where we're at, quote unquote, where we're at with these categories. There are very few categorical analytics that help managerial decision making around forecasting and price negotiation. It's a category with bottom line upside that often gets neglected because of these challenges.
Okay, so from what I understand, these are pretty typical industry challenges. Could we start with a couple organizational inefficiencies? So Peggy, from your standpoint, what are some typical inefficiencies around MRO and industrial supply management?
So first of all, as we talked, is defining what you mean as MRO, and then getting your items categorized in your system as such. But then let's remember that we might not just be running one system. With today's M&A, you're often doing it out of 3 or 4 systems, depending on any mergers or acquisitions that you've had. So cleansing your data, making sure it's correct, that all takes time. And then knowing how much we buy of everything and where we buy it from goes hand in hand with that.
Yeah, I totally agree, Peggy. And I would only add that there are so many tools that we use today in our personal lives that make buying experience that much more efficient by simply showing transparent data that gives you the knowledge to make the best buying decisions possible. Data has real power.
Yeah, you know, these types of tools are making their way into the B&V market as well. So we have an example here of GoodRx, and we'll show this video.
The exact same drug that's $10 at this pharmacy is $150 at this one. GoodRx finds prices and discount coupons on every prescription. Just input the drug name and instantly find savings in virtually every pharmacy in America.
You know, guys, that brings up a good point. I was just talking last week with my father-in-law, who recently retired. He had corporate insurance and now has private insurance. He suffered from diabetes for about the last decade, and he went to buy insulin for the first time, not having the corporate insurance, but the new insurance. And as he checked out at the same pharmacy he's always gone to, it was going to cost $500 for a 90-day supply, and he was shocked. I don't think he'd ever paid more than maybe $10 or $20 to that accord. And so I was kind of talking about what we're doing here at ManufacturingPower and bringing price transparency not only to industrial manufacturing, but how this exists in the business to consumer market as well. So GoodRx is just one example. Folks might be familiar with Expedia for making travel arrangements, possibly TrueCar for shopping for an automobile as well. Data is certainly powerful, but only good data is impactful. Peggy, would you agree Forecasting uses data to improve your ability to reduce stock shortages and preserve or increase profit margin?
Absolutely. So your data shows what you've done historically. It can show seasonality if you are in an industry that's seasonality, as well as if you do things like shut down over 4th of July for PMs, your historical data is going to show you that. It's also nice to remember that data is as good as it is, and it's as good as remembering what happened last year. So if you shut down the whole facility for 2 weeks, you probably aren't going to do that this year, so you might not need as much that was on your forecast. But knowing those few little things, the data will impact your accuracy. And of course, having too much or too little inventory changes the profit margins, and it gives CFOs heart attacks.
Not good.
Not good.
Yeah, so staying on the data integrity, it is a vital part of supply chain management. Could you share a couple more examples on how this has both positively and negatively affected the outcomes on projects you've been leading?
Absolutely. Well, obviously, a positive outcome would mean, for me, getting lower prices. But that goes hand in hand. If you don't have data that's very good, when you go back to your negotiations with your suppliers, if it's showing your data is showing inflated usage, well, you're going to get a low price. But that also means in a year when you didn't use as much, that supplier might be coming back to you for a price increase. On the other way, it's really nice that if you were too low on that, you might be paying too much. Now, maybe next year you get to do that price decrease, but you left money on the table for the year.
Sure. Here's a big one, time spent on this category. Let's talk about a hypothetical. As a distributor sales professional, it's my goal to get a list of your MRO spend items to quote. So Peggy, if you're tasked with developing a full MRO RFQ for either benchmarking purposes or because you're shopping for a new distributor partner, how long could this process take?
This process could take a couple days if you have great data, as we talked about data integrity, or if it's data that we have to cleanse, it can take weeks. For example, when I talked about the MRO RFP category earlier in a previous job, and we came out with some not so great data, it took people at least 6 weeks to cleanse that data. And of course, that doesn't mean that just I was working on that.
Well, it sounds expensive. Do you have any idea how much that project cost?
Oh, Matt, I'll just say it was expensive.
Sure. Yeah, staying on the topic of management information, what might be some useful KPIs to have in place with respect to managing MRO data as it relates to your supply chain and procurement teams?
You know, it would always be good to see what your inventory turns are, or what maybe your most economic order quantities are. You could be ordering too few or too many at the same time. Then, of course, it would be nice to see what other people or what the benchmark is for price. Because, of course, I'm always thinking I'm getting a great deal because I'm a super great negotiator, but I don't really know that for sure.
Sure.
And, of course, then data can also show me where supplier consolidation opportunities are, either between plants, if I have more than one plant buying from different locations, or just showing me where we use some of the things that a preferred supplier can also handle.
Interesting, Peggy. I have a quick follow-up question to that. You mentioned inventory and tracking inventory, but would you agree that, or what do you think is, as far as vendor performance, would that data help monitor that as well?
Absolutely. We can figure out not only the things you think about, which is supplier on time and supplier accuracy, but you can also see how much of your spend is with that supplier and if you want more or less.
Yeah, I'm used to being on the other side of the vendor scorecard, but Peggy, tell us how many you incorporate that into pricing negotiations as well?
Well, of course, you can take the scorecard with the person that you know and know if they're doing well or not doing well. But it's also a good way to ask questions to the suppliers that you don't know so well. I mean, it's nice if everything comes in on time, so they have 100% accuracy on that. the receivers are really happy, but if every invoice is wrong, AP is not so happy with that. So you just know those are questions that you can ask to a supplier that you're not so familiar with.
Yeah, again, it sounds like it goes back to data utilization. Peggy, what are typical goals set for purchasing teams around MRO and industrial supplies?
Well, for purchasing teams at most, all our goals are usually about cost savings. And
Sure.
some cost savings and maybe some extra cost savings.
Cost savings, cost savings, cost savings. Absolutely. Thanks, Peggy. So today, we've covered 5 common challenges associated with MRO and industrial supplies. The first, organizational inefficiencies. Second, around data integrity. Third, time is money. Fourth, evaluating supplier performance. And fifth, managerial decision making. Each of these challenges represent an opportunity for improvement. Sir Richard Branson has said that by turning challenges into opportunities, you will find success you never realized you were capable of achieving. Again, the title of this webinar is Stop Leaving Money on the Table. Here's a checklist of 5 items to encourage self-assessment for reviewing and developing, as well as actionable items that can be used to turn your MRO and industrial supply challenges into actual cost savings opportunities. So first, we have organization inefficiencies. To establish and consistently apply a performance measurement system that focuses on outcomes versus targets, internally as well as externally, and on internal historical MRO pricing versus market pricing. Second, we have data integrity, which continuously elevate existing MRO and industrial supply data by clearly defining procurement goals, responsibilities, and expected results. Third, time is money. So to optimize B2B solutions with tools designed to improve procurement procedures, reduce inefficiencies, and achieve greater value for money. Fourth, evaluating supplier performance. Utilize data to create a routine of applying performance measures for benchmarking your top preferred suppliers to increase your power at the negotiation table. And fifth, on managerial decision making, to create simple to use, understandable KPIs by promoting outcomes to increase savings and efficiencies, and by implementing manufacturing power.
Hey, Matt, just to add to that, we're going to be sending this out to everybody at the end of the webinar, and hopefully you can implement this into your processes and procedures as needed.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mike. So it looks like we have a couple questions that have come in. Why don't we jump to that? So the first one, it says, we're looking for creative ways to find additional margin in our milling operations, and we think there's an opportunity to leverage our tooling spend. The problem is we have 2 locations with 2 different systems, and the data is a complete mess. The left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. Is there a good way to consolidate everything so we can get a clear picture here? Peggy, could you explain, or could you try to answer this question?
Sure, Matt. It's going to take some work. That's just obvious, right? Unfortunately, sometimes if your data is a complete mess, you end up going to the supplier to have them run reports and then taking that and looking at what data you have.
Sure.
And I would say, you know, it just takes some elbow grease on some of this to figure out what you have.
So just in that scenario, Peggy, that you mentioned going back to the supplier, I mean, there's a lot of trust there. So,
Absolutely.
And then there's nothing really to, would you say, benchmark against that? I mean, if your data's a mess, it can be kind of a disaster. There's no way that you have to put complete trust in them, right?
Right. And then that's unfortunate because you are having to trust the suppliers completely to run the reports. And a lot of times if they think you're going to work on an RFP or they think they get nervous too. I mean, you have to start going, hey, do you have that report yet? Hey, do you have that report yet? Hey, because they kind of understand what's going on. So that's, again, what we just talked about. That's why having your own data helps so much, because then you're not reliant on the supplier to run yearly reports for you and to try to figure out what you're spending, where you're spending it.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, in this specific scenario, often what we run into is, you know, suppliers, this is nothing completely, most people know this, but suppliers will have their own part numbers for industry products, and making comparisons, what you have internal versus external data as far as manufacturer part number versus a supplier partner can add even more challenging or more challenges to that data processing and data collection.
And they don't always like to give you the manufacturer
Of
power.
course.
They would just want to give you
Yeah.
their supplier number, so
Yeah.
it's even harder.
Thanks, you guys. We got a few to go through here. We got some time, so that's good. How about second here? One person says, interesting webinar, but MRO is a pretty insignificant part of our overall spend at my shop. Why should I care? Mike, you take this one?
Yeah, I'll take this one. Wow, I appreciate the honest question. I guess it really depends on the value you put on cost savings. Right now, we know that finding and retaining qualified workers, especially in manufacturing, is a huge problem and a huge challenge. And any money you can put back into your business, however much that may be, could be used for hiring top talent or even another employee, which may separate you from your competition.
Okay. Peggy, these categories are a pain to manage, and we just don't have the resources to get them organized. Any suggestions where to start?
So, absolutely understand the question. You have to start with where you're starting it at. It's nice to think that your data looks better than it does. It's nice to think that you're more organized than you do, but you have to start where you are. So, start with the things like the checklist that was given. Start with running what data you have and figure that out. Of course, manufacturing has a great tool that you can use, or any other tools like that. As you start with data, start boiling it down and use the tools that are out there with data to help you.
Peggy, just a little follow-up there. Typically, who's responsible within an organization, and does it depend on size and of the company on who gets that responsibility? Maybe explain a little bit about that too.
Sure, and it definitely depends on the size of the company and how they're structured. It can go anywhere from the maintenance manager to someone in global sourcing, such as I was at one point. And it can be centralized or decentralized. So, and sometimes decentralized means every plant is doing their own, and centralized means, somebody at corporate, for lack of a better term, is responsible for that. And of course, if you're the person like I was, who was important for central purchasing, I better know what my maintenance managers are thinking and what their problems are and where their pain points are.
Absolutely.
Sure. There's some more questions here I'm going to read through, and some of these kind of dovetail with other ones. The next question, in really small companies, how should they best use these technologies? I think we brushed on it a little bit, Peggy, with tools and solutions. Mike, Peggy, anything else comes to mind?
Yeah, no, I would say in that scenario, really small companies, finding margin is going to be a key. To stay the most competitive as possible is really one of the ultimate goals. And finding any sort of cost savings that you can put back into your business is going to be very important. As all of you know, cash is king. So getting some back and putting it back is definitely a benefit. Now, looking at specific areas and getting started in those areas is one of the common challenges that we find. Is it can be overwhelming. You've got, you might be a small company, but you may have 1,000 part numbers that you consider MRO or indirect supplies. Pick a couple of categories, say tooling, say like the 80-20 rule of what are your top 10 items that you purchase or consistently purchase. Take a look at those, identify those, make sure the data is solid and trustworthy, and then go from there.
And I would say, I think a tool like ManufacturingPower that gives you some benchmark prices helps in a really small company as well, because depending on how small you are, a lot of times suppliers want to give you 10% off and make you feel like that's all they can give you because you're so small. At least this gives you an idea, a benchmark of kind of where you could be.
Sure. That makes sense. maybe I'll take the next one. It says, how does manufacturing power cost justify itself? So again, I can take this offline too, but in our research, gosh, over the last 12 to 18 months at least, we continue to see 11 to 14% cost savings possibilities utilizing a price transparency solution. So across all categories, MRO, industrial supply, we'd be happy to provide you guys with a demo, like a live demo. We're not going to do that on today's call. We showed the video at the beginning, but follow up with Mike or I, and we'll share a demo and we'll dig more into it. We have a lot of case studies, a lot of information to provide. But again, 11 to 14% cost savings, and I believe right now Mike is running 100% money back guarantee. So within 90 days, if we don't show you the cost for the solutions, $49.95, just under $5,000. If we don't show you $5,000 in cost savings in the first 90 days, we'll refund 100% of your money. So pretty cool. I'm really proud to say that. Here's another question. What are the flags or serious situations other than COVID-19 that small manufacturers should get these data points?
So obviously, I think that the coronavirus, COVID-19, has brought to light some of the risks that we probably were kind of ignoring.
Okay.
Things like supply. I mean, we all have gone through the whole Chinese New Year thing. If you do business out of China, they shut down anywhere from forever to a week, depending on who you talk to, kind of a thing. So I think some of that stuff, the coronavirus has kind of come up. So things like, are you dual supplied? I mean, do you have a backup supplier? Are they approved? So has your quality team been there? And then how fast can they ramp up? Because it's great to say, yes, I can move from supplier A to supplier B if something happens, but can supplier B ramp up fast enough for you to keep in the solution, to keep in parts?
I would also add to that, Peggy, is that, one of the things that you mentioned that it brings to light some things. Also, I mean, people obviously read the news and see what's happening, but, onshoring, bringing back things to the U.S., qualifying those suppliers is, it's a good thing for us here in the U.S., but bringing that back to light, because if things start to happen like this, okay, what are the ramifications? How is the supply chain impacted, obviously? But then, as far as the data points, it's great to understand strictly from a pricing standpoint of these items, how that can be impacted too. So if you're getting items from a low-cost country, say China, and now you're forced to, or in the position to have to onshore back here in the U.S., what does that look like? How is that going to impact your business? How can you leverage some of that with your supply chain to be stronger partners in the future as well?
And one of the data points can be, how much inventory do you have? How long could you last if something happened? That's a good data point to kind of take out of this exercise, if we want to call it that, on figuring out, okay, how long can I keep the factory running if a certain part doesn't come in?
Absolutely.
That gives you some pretty clear information, and then allows you to do some emergency planning when it can just be planning instead of action.
Very good.
Perfect. How about, can small manufacturers gain pricing negotiation leverage with this data? Absolutely. Mike?
Yes.
What do you want to say?
Kind of a T-ball here. But yeah, absolutely. As mentioned before, I mean, whether or not, manufacturing power is right for you or not, the bottom line is that more information that you have to take into any sort of negotiation, any sort of accurate data that you have, only increases your negotiation power. That's obvious. But the tough part is, okay, how do you get that, and how do how do you understand it? How do you utilize it? How does it become impactful there? There are plenty of things, and Peggy knows this better than anybody, that impact when you sit down across the table from a potential supplier. What are things that go into that? We mentioned it before, but a supplier scorecard that you look at: quality, delivery, compliance, all these different things that go into that, and price is only one of those types of pieces of information that really impact the negotiation power, but it is part of it. So understanding that data and having useful tools to help organize that and keep it straight can only help your chances of doing better in the negotiation process.
Thanks, Mike. How about, here's some on the call. We're a mid-sized manufacturer spread across 5 locations. We have a wide variety of people buying MRO items on credit cards and traditional purchase orders. How can ManufacturingPower help make sense of our current data and get a sense of how you can help streamline the RFQ process?
So the first thing I would say is you have to get your data, and I have absolutely experienced this. When they go on credit card, the data gets lost, because now you may understand that that a credit card was used for a certain supplier for $200, but I have no idea what those $200 is for.
Sure.
So I think that data is very hard to get, and you have to be strong and get some allies to say, this can't go on credit card anymore.
Now, when you say that, okay, I'm going to follow up with a question there, because when you say allies, who predominantly would that be? Would that be somebody in accounting?
Yes.
Okay.
Your accounting and your finance, your CFO, because they are going to be the ones who start with the edicts of this has to not go on credit card.
Yeah.
But then you need the managers in between who approve those credit cards to be on board as well, because I can say don't put it on credit card, and if my manager approves it on credit card every time.
Sure.
Now, just another follow-up question to that is, credit cards, okay, they're paid with credit cards, but the invoice information actually goes through AP.
Yeah.
And that information is available.
So the invoices usually would go through whatever your expenses reports are, kind of a thing. So you need to start pulling those, which is not an easy task, because no one wants to do that.
Right.
No, not only the purchasing person, I don't want to have to go find those invoices, but the accounting people are like, I don't want to have to pull those invoices. But sometimes you just start with a month and see, at least you can start seeing, or 2 months. You start with an area that you can feel like, I can control this much. Let me get 2 months or 3 months of data that I at least can put my arms around, right?
It's interesting. Thanks, Peggy. The question really was, how does ManufacturingPower help make sense of that? And with that, we do collect and organize that invoice information, so it really takes it off your plate. And from a time perspective, from a frustration perspective, from a resource perspective, it really does help streamline that concern.
So are you meaning that I can just hand you my invoices and you're gonna work the work for me?
Yes.
There we go.
Yep. And again,
Simple answer.
I think, Mike, what we need to do next week is follow up, and we'll do a video, and we'll get that out, a demo, right? And then, folks, if you want to see one-to-one, reach out to Mike or I. Happy to do that. Great question. Thank you. A few more questions. How easy is it to do volume quoting of commodity spend? How do you audit your spend in one large event?
So if I think I understand the question, I'm going to go with that. So this person can put a follow-up question if I don't answer it correctly. So MRO obviously is a big, complicated category. We talked about that. It's got a lot of nuts and bolts and screws and motors and goodness knows everything else in it. And so when I've gone to RFP or when I'm doing negotiations, I do what I call a market basket, and that's probably just because the first person who ever taught me how to do it called it a market basket. You can call it whatever you want to, where as we've talked about that 80-20 rule, you spend 80% of the money on the top 20% of the items.
Sure.
So I just pulled like either the most expensive items, the most quantity of items, or the most critical. So is the plant going to shut down if I don't have this?
Yeah.
I'm going to put that on the list, and I'm going to give them a sampling, right? So we're going to talk about a sampling, give me pricing on this sampling. And then that's what I'm going to do most of my comparisons off of. But then knowing that, you go into the negotiations with, okay, so you saw I have, X amount of nuts and bolts, which we call fasteners, and X amount of motors. Let's give us some category percentages off based on what you can see we use. So that's how we've done big volumes.
Thank you, Peggy. Another question, I think we may have answered this briefly earlier. What type of ROI have your customers realized? So again, the ROI that we come across very conservatively is 11 to 14% top line cost savings with market price transparency the work center brings. There's examples where it's astronomically greater than that. So probably be good just to follow up with us. We have a half dozen or more case studies in the last couple of months right now we can share with you guys. A bunch of recent press release articles we can share too. So I get super excited about that. How about, why not use Google or Amazon to determine best price? Isn't Amazon always the lowest or current market price?
So I would say for Amazon, which is either a purchasing person's best friend or worst enemy, and I sometimes tend to think it's my worst enemy, I can buy anything I want to off Amazon, but the truth of the matter is I have nobody to back it up, and I don't have a partner to help me with the other things. So one of the things we talked about as we were preparing for this webinar was, what happens when you get down to the supplier who's been a good strategic supplier for years and years? You can only go after them for price for so long. So then they start to become a strategic partner who's helping you find efficiencies in your plant, who's helping you find better things, the belts that's going to last longer. It might be a little bit more expensive, but it lasts longer than, the one you were using. So you end up getting a better return on that investment. There's a lot of those type of things that you're not going to get from Amazon. You're going to get a part at a price. And if it breaks within 2 weeks, you get to buy it again. Where if I'm working with a strategic supplier, that one throat to choke thing. I know who I'm going after to say, hey, wait, what's going on with this? And they're either helping me fix it and or helping me find an alternative if the belt was wrong.
That makes sense.
Can I just add something there real quick? And I apologize if you covered this, but so list price, okay? There's list and published price that people see on the web, and Amazon or Google are very good at crawling the web and finding those prices. We look at actual invoice information. We anonymize that. ManufacturingPower, we anonymize that information, so you see what other comparable type of companies are paying for the exact same things that you're paying. So when you're building this relationship with these partners, as Peggy mentioned, your supply chain, your suppliers, your preferred suppliers, everything's not meant to be bought off of Amazon, as Peggy said. You need a specific belt. You need to trust somebody to go do that. Now that doesn't mean that you can't shop around for things, and that is, I always think about a story about my dad. He said, if you're a buyer or a seller, you want to feel like you've won something. And if you're in a position of negotiation, if you have the best data and best information possible going into that negotiation and understanding that, you're going to win. And now just, going back to the Amazon portion of that or Google, there's no way that Amazon and Google will show you the true market or price transparency in that situation or case. They don't see any of that, that invoicing information and are able to capture that. So hopefully that answered that question.
Yep, I would add just one thing on Amazon. If you're going to use Amazon for parts, and sometimes you have to because it's an obsolete part, hard to find, whatever, get an Amazon business account. Those business accounts then allow you to track what's purchased.
That's a great point, Peggy. Thank you. I think maybe one more question, or one final question for today's call. And the questions, we use a lot of suppliers like Grainger and MSC for MRO items. Do you find success negotiating better prices with these catalog houses, or do you go elsewhere?
So you mentioned, who did they mention again?
Grainger and MSC.
Grainger will negotiate with you. MSC will negotiate with you. The one that's not as negotiable is McMaster-Carr, and I'm not saying you can't negotiate with them. I'm just saying it's a little bit harder. Grainger didn't used to. I will say that but I think they've seen the light.
Yeah, and I mean, there's different models now. I mean, the previous question with Amazon, Grainger's had to restructure their pricing model and go to market completely just based off of that. And that's one of the results, is that they do have to negotiate now. And I mean, that's just two. We work with companies that have hundreds of suppliers, as I'm sure many of you on the call do as well. And the vast majority will negotiate. They are looking for business, and if you come to them with any sort of counter offer, in order for them to get the business, they'll consider it, and as they say, they will be willing to sharpen their pencil.
You just need to find the person who sits in your close to your location. You know, a real salesperson. You're not just talking to customer service on the phone.
Great. You know, thanks, Peggy. Thanks, Mike. Thank you all for being on the call and for attending.
And the great questions.
Yeah, great questions. Great questions. At this time, we're going to give you guys back, I guess, about 8 minutes of your day. Please check your inbox for the checklist we described earlier. If you don't get that, reach out. We'd be happy to send that to you. If you have any additional questions about manufacturing power and how we can help drive cost savings towards your bottom line, please visit our website at manufacturingpower.com or call us directly to schedule a free demo. I'm not sure if our slides stopped advancing. Apologize, we had a slide at the end here. Again, Mike and I will personally follow up with you guys and make sure you guys have our contact information, and we'd love to speak with you soon. You guys, thanks for joining us today. Have a great rest of your week. We look forward to talking to you soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.